All right, so we've seen now the importance of an acknowledgement of limitations which exist in every study. Now we're going to look at some of the important ways that authors instantiate that linguistically in their papers. Specifically, in this video, we'll be talking about the concept of this rhetorical move, this hypothetical real, and making a concession in your argumentation. And then also what a hedge is. Um, so where do many authors stop? Well, most authors that don't have a lot of experience writing, they feel like the discussion section is mostly just a recap of the results. And so you have here, imagine the authors just stopped here, the discussion. The results of this study show for the first time that red meat consumption may have a perceivable impact on auxiliary body odor. Odors of donors on the non-meat diet were judged as more pleasant, more attractive, and less intense. This this is almost like that article um, in the antimicrobial agents journal that generated so much controversy about hydrochloroquine and azithromycin, where the there's very little nod to any limitations of the research. But these authors go beyond that. They don't just stop here. They recap, but they also lead back to other parts of they also refer back to other parts of the article, including the introduction and the method section, which we saw tied together, especially with respect to this last statement here. This pattern was not influenced by Rader's menstrual cycle or partnership status. So in other words, um, that variable which they brought up at the beginning of the study in the introduction as a possible influence on odor, and therefore was incorporated into the method of this research design, is now reported here as being non-significant in the results of the hedonicity perception of the odor donors. And if this just came up out of nowhere, it would be odd here in the discussion, but this is all tied together in the IMRAD. This is all kind of a very nicely interwoven variable that they've controlled for, that is first presented in the introduction and discussed there as a variable that can influence smell. Therefore, it is controlled in the method section, and then it is picked up here and reported just in case the reader forgot. There it is. It's there, and it makes the result all that stronger. And that, of course, is a nod to the Naysayer. But there are other ways, in many other ways, important ways, that the authors interweave these nods to the Naysayer, who really should be remembered throughout the research article writing. So the Naysayer may have brought up the sample size. Imagine you, the writer, you think, okay, well, they may bring this up, the reviewers, the naysayers, because obviously they didn't have a huge cohort of odor donors. So what do they say? They say um, the number of odor donors was relatively small, 17 men. However, the nature of the experiment was balanced and within subject. So this, first of all, this fact that they had a small number, that's acknowledging, that's looking at the odor, that the naysayer, and saying, hey, I know you're there, I know you're reading, I know you're thinking this. Yeah, we admit this. However, don't go getting crazy on me now. I mean, yeah, you may be upset about the small number of people here, but however, the nature of the experiment was balanced and within subject. And so they then come in with an answer to that statement. They're writing to what's called the reader in the text. Even though their question hasn't been asked, they know that question is going to be implicitly or could implicitly be asked, and so they're answering it already. And they go further. They actually go on and explain why that's important. In other words, each rater was assessed. Each rater assessed some donors first in the meat condition and some donors first in the non-meat, so it was counterbalanced. And then they go on and explain further. Moreover, the diet we prescribed to our odor donors was identical except the meat content. This gives us high confidence. So if they had this express this high confidence without saying this other stuff, it would weaken. It would actually, their paper would be weakened because they wouldn't have warranted that. But they've warranted um, this statement with through all their explanation of why their results are meaningful despite the small number of participants. This is what's called making a concession. The author or authors concede a point first to kind of already acknowledge the elephant in the room, to disarm and lower the objection and the criticism of a naysayer, make that concession, and then explain why the results are meaningful, or how those results can still be interpreted as being important despite those points. So here the author makes a concession and then explains and warrants, provides evidence of why the result is important anyway. The important thing is that to first make that concession. Here's another one that the naysayer might have said, but mood can influence smell too. Yeah, but the authors were very careful to, first of all, acknowledge that that is a variable that's important in that can influence smell in the introduction. They controlled for that variable in the method design, and then they pick it up here. And they say, theoretically, our diet may have influenced the mood of the donors, which may in turn have an impact on quality of body odor. So they've already brought this up, and they say theoretically, this is kind of what's called a hypothetical-real move. It's very similar to making a concession. It's acknowledging the limitation, but it's not a limitation in the design of the research. It's a hypothetical problem. Um, but then again, they go on, they warrant, and they say, well, however, this is probably not the case, as we did not find differences in self-rated stress, fatigue, and mood between meat and non-meat conditions. We'll come back to this importance of words like this later. It's probably not the case. The reliability of the results is also supported by the fact that mean ratings across the two sessions were not significantly different, and that there was no change in masculinity rating across experimental conditions. So here they're reporting back to the data, the inferential statistics conducted on the data. And so you have this kind of hypothetical first, and then real. Okay, this or their interpretation. It's kind of like the same move as the they say and I say. Um, and it's important here in the sense that first you present the hypothetical and then you present the real. Again, it's kind of like making a concession, and that just strengthens their case. Another one would be, but is it the meat per se or the protein? This is a question that either they thought of before when they were writing, or maybe one that came up in the review process. But the point is that they make sure they put in that hypothetical real there again. Potentially, our findings may be a result of different energetic protein values. In other words, our diet only differed in meat content and therefore in energetic value. Thus, this factor can be responsible for the effect, not the meat per se. So all of this here would be a hypothetical. However, if this would be the case, one might expect diet of higher energetic value to be more attractive, as was found in the Bank-Vol study. Our results show higher attractiveness in the non-meat diet and therefore believe it is caused by the meat effect specifically. So they have a hypothetical and then they warrant their position of why they think the real result is should be interpreted as this. And notice again the result, the language they use, we therefore believe that it is caused. So again, we'll come back to this point of hedging in the discussion section. But here I just want you to focus on the moves. Another one the naysayer could have brought up, changes are probably quantitative, not qualitative, suggesting that maybe the statistics um, are responsible for the interpretation of the results, not whether or not there was real hedonicity involved. So they, just in case, the authors put that in there, another hypothetical. They say one may argue that the higher attractiveness of donors on the non-meat diet is due to quantitative rather than qualitative changes in their axillary odor. In our view, this is kind of like they're saying we believe, right? In our view, however, meat consumption changes the composition of some auxiliary chemicals, see in the second paragraph below, and therefore we believe that both changes of quantitative and qualitative nature are responsible for the observed effect. One tip I want to insert here is that you should practice being a naysayer. So um, get involved in being a gatekeeper, in being a reviewer of actual journal articles, and feel what it really is like to be in that position, and to find issues with other people's research, um, and therefore when you write, you have yourself even as a naysayer audience. Another thing that should be pointed out here is that authors love to make lemonade out of lemons in the discussion section. So if there are limitations, and there always are, um, you can actually kind of merge those into um, uh, good things, and I'll show you what I mean. So if you're talking about uh, limitations, that these limitations could connect to other things, such as talking about practical applications, practical implications, and especially this one here, talking about how the study advances the area. Limitations can actually connect to this. So here an example of this. So this is again, the meat study. At this point, it is not possible to say how long the meat content in food remains perceptible in axillary odor. Nor do we know how long one must consume meat to produce discernible changes in body odor. Moreover, we can also only speculate about the already perceptible amount of meat consumed. So these are all things that they don't know, and the study did not was not able to account for. The 2 weeks diet period we chose for our study was based on results of an analytical study which found compounds of environmental origin in axillary odor after 10 days of hygienic and diet restrictions. Future studies should address the question of diet duration or quantity of meat consumption and changes in body odor. Further, it should also be tested whether the observed effect is restricted to red meat or may be applied to white meat. So this is them saying, okay, this is what our study does not do or was not able to do. But future studies could address this question. So, and in addition, they even specify that they could restrict it to red meat or white meat. And this here, this very last sentence here about that the suggestion that people should now look into red meat versus white meat is kind of also maybe even giving themselves an opening to further their own research. So there's a kind of caveat followed by um, what's still needed and how you can, there are still avenues to be investigated. And often those two are tied together.